Hello, MLSecOps community, and thank you so much for joining us for our first ever MLSecOps community meetup of 2024. My name is Charlie McCarthy, and I'm your MLSecOps community leader. Today, we have a fantastic lineup of presentations, Q&A, and insights about the security of AI. After the live presentations, we'll be demoing ModelScan, which is an open source tool by Protect AI that helps protect against model serialization attacks. Make sure you join the conversation by engaging in the live stream chat, and stay connected to future conversations by joining us in the MLSecOps Slack group. With that, we hope you enjoy today's live stream, and we hope to see you at future MLSecOps community events later this year.
Hello, hello. Hello. Are we in? Hello, everybody. Sorry to interrupt. I'm here to give a warning. We're about to get started, so your drinks, your plates, find a seat, and we will start with content. Let's see. Ready? Okay, everyone take your seats, please. We're going to get started. How's this sound? Good? Okay. Oops, excuse me. I'm sorry. Hi, everybody. While you're getting settled, keep doing what you're doing. If you're grabbing food, finish filling your plates. If you still need a beverage, please help yourself there. If anyone has the last bio break, right around the corner. While we're getting settled, I'm just going to give us a quick introduction. My name is Charlie McCarthy. I'm the MLSecOps community leader. If you're part of our Slack group, you might have seen me in that space. We've connected online in LinkedIn. Anyway, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of the night, and then we will dive into the very exciting stuff. This is still super spotty up here. Better? All right. Bear with us. The speakers will have a better microphone. So tonight, we're here to talk about machine learning security operations, building AI security into the entire life cycle. We have a couple guest speakers, Diana Kelley and Adam Shostack. And special impromptu guest, Dan McInerney, which is very exciting. Diana is going to be. I'm just kidding. I'm going to talk into this. This one's not any better. Thank you. If you don't have the opportunity to have your question answered during the Q&A session, both of them will be available, and you can hunt them down afterward. We do have a couple other activities during social hour at the end, including a book signing and complimentary copies of Mr. Shostack's most recent title. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. I'm just making sure that I didn't leave anything out here during my little 2 minutes I was allotted. No, I don't think so. So once again, everyone, thanks for coming. Thank you to Protect AI for the use of this beautiful office space. Thank you to our guest speakers for joining us, and also everyone who's watching via the live stream. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our first guest, CISO of Protect AI, Diana Kelley. Her to have this one? Yeah.
All right, you gotta mic me. You gotta mic me.
Live stream people.
I stole your mic. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. We'll get that little pack. There you go. All right. Pocket.
Yeah, we don't need to run it.
Exactly. All right, and then here we go.
Thank you, Nick. Oh, yeah. And thank you, everybody, for being here. We're really happy that you're here. How many folks work in machine learning or AI? Okay, a ton. How many folks are security folks? Okay, so we got a couple that are both. So we're mostly AI and MLSecOps. What I'm going to be talking about is how we can build security into the machine learning operational lifecycle. So first we're going to start, oh, where's Josh? Okay, Josh. Just something from CISO that I thought was really interesting is that when we talk about AI, and I like that they turn, a government group has actually used the term mysticism when they're talking about software. And I like that because I think that there's something to it. You work in ML. A lot of folks here, you work in machine learning. You don't think it's mystical. You don't think it's magical. But a lot of people do not understand how AI works. And it does seem very magical and like, what is going on here? It's not. It's software. It's math. It's not magic. It's math. And that it's software. And that means that we need to protect it and we need to secure it the way that we need to secure software. However, we can't secure it the exact same way that we do software. So we need to understand the differences. So what can go wrong? If we take a look on the next slide, you can see that there's a sort of threat perception about AI, right? It's going to be, sorry, am I blocking you? It's going to be, the bots are coming to get us, and it's Skynet, and even, and deep fakes, and all of these things around AI and ML, which it's true, there are deep fakes are happening, but it's not really the real risk. We get very scared about Keanu Reeves and a deep fake, or about the fact that the AI bots are going to start making decisions for us, and we miss the reality. And the reality is that data scientists are storing passwords and other sensitive information unprotected in Jupyter notebooks. That's actually pretty scary. API tokens, which are sort of static forever passwords, right? They're being stored. And I thought that this was really particularly interesting. This was from July of last year. And this is a note not about like, oh, these data scientists, you need to stop doing it. It was like, guys, stop the presses. This thing that you're doing is actually not safe. Like, nobody was trying to do anything wrong. Nobody was trying to do anything bad. It was just they didn't understand security practices. They don't understand security practices. And that's really what MLSecOps is about. It's about bringing the machine learning and the security teams together. Another threat reality, if we go to the next slide, is an actual, in real life, attacking of machine learning. And the person who came up with this is Dan McInerney, so I'm going to let him walk you through. Our lead threat researcher is going to walk you through what this means.
So as an attacker, a lot of times we hear a lot about like chat input attacks and stuff. And hearing from customers is that they're saying, well, my AI tools are behind a firewall, so they're safe. We're not exposing it like ChatGPT is or anything like that, so it's totally okay. And that's really just not the case. We found a multitude of vulnerabilities in very popular frameworks, GitHub stars up to like 30,000 of these projects, where it ends up being a one email, one link, one click RCE. So like here's an example of how you would attack an organization that just started up an AI department, let's say, to build models or LLMs or do whatever. But probably an attacker is probably not going to like sign into your LLM and try and get it to spit out, your bank credentials. It's not a practical attack. The practical attack is stuff like phishing emails. It's already behind the firewall, so maybe you just go to LinkedIn. You search for AI engineers, you look up the AI engineer's skills. Maybe they say, hey, we use Ray or something like that. Or I have skills in Ray or whatever tool is listed there. And you can go look up a vulnerability for that tool and then target that tool in, let's say, a phishing attack. So you find the AI engineers at the company, use the harvester to look up their email addresses, which is usually like firstname.lastname@company.com. We're going to send them an email. And inside of this email, we're going to have a link. And in that link, it's going to pretend like it's going to a blog post of the company or something, but in fact, it is a JavaScript drive-by attack. So like Ray and Prefect, for example, both of those suffer from an issue where if you clicked a link and you were serving Ray locally on your own laptop, not even like on the networks or anything, not exposed to anybody except yourself. You click that link, now your browser's going to send a request to that local host machine using the JavaScript drive-by attack and get remote code execution. It's just one-click remote code execution. These are the kind of vulnerabilities that we're seeing in the supply chain of machine learning and that get oftentimes overlooked because companies will say, we have a very mature security program. We know everything's up to date and all that kind of stuff. Well, it might be up to date, but you're still going to be vulnerable to 1-day and 0-day vulnerabilities, which are popping up all the time that we see through our Hunter bug bounty program. So, I mean, in this example on the screen, attacker phishes credentials. Okay, so this is a different example. This is on MLflow. So let's say an attacker just does a normal phishing attack. They send you 1,000 phishing emails, and only one person has to click on those to give that attacker VPN access. You have to remember, hackers have an infinite amount of times to send these phishing emails. You're never going to stop them forever, even if you're a very mature security organization. They get one credential for the VPN. They log into the VPN. Now they're going to go ahead and do a little Nmap scan. And when they do the Nmap scan, what's interesting is a lot of these scanning tools from security products don't actually identify ML tools. Nmap doesn't know what MLflow is. So you have to get a little creative as an attacker. We released an Nmap script that helps you identify a lot of these ML tools on the network, but you can also use something like HTTP screenshot, which will screenshot all the web servers on the network. And then you can use that and your knowledge of what an AI tool is to target it. So let's say you use Nmap, you find the screenshots, and you see that MLflow is in there. And you go, oh, I know about MLflow because of the constant security notices that have been appearing on a weekly basis in this thing. One of them was a local file include, there's remote code executions, and all these things. And they only recently added authentication, and it's an optional authentication. It's not even like built in automatically. So we're going to use the MLflow LFI because there's been, I don't know, 5 of them or something. And that's a local file include. So the hacker's now on your network. He sees MLflow. You have everything else is up to date. Everything's cool. But MLflow obviously had a one day, the day before this just got released. You use that to read the SSH keys of the AI engineer. And AI engineers are very high privileged users who have access to high privileged sections of the network because they need to have access to lots and lots of data to do their job. They need access to databases worth of data to build models and to pull it in. So now you have the SSH credentials of an AI engineer. And this is all through a single phishing email by just doing an Nmap scan and exploiting a very, very likely vulnerability if you see an MLflow server. You can use those SSH keys and spray them across the network. Now you have access to 20 computers instead of just one. So the attacker went from outside the firewall to owning 20 different computers, possibly in different departments like the accounting department and stuff. The AI engineers SSH keys had credentials for those. They might even have cloud credentials on the MLflow server, which in about 80% of the deployments I've seen of MLflow, they use the cloud credentials to store data. So now you have access to their AWS cloud as well as the internal network. And now you can perform some, malicious actions. You could do ransomware and all this kind of stuff. So just having this stuff behind a firewall, even just hosting a lot of these tools locally, is not gonna protect you. This is the real threat surface that I've been seeing in the AI industry as a whole. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. And Dan can answer questions too at the end. Yeah, so I mean, this is very different, right? You hear that, that's a lot different than just, a deepfake or Skynet. You hear that this is actually really impactful to an organization. So what do we need to do? To protect users, to protect data, protect entities that are using ML and AI, we need to build security in. But how are we going to do that? Well, we actually have an example from okay, thank you. From the previous worlds that we've been living in, which is software. Anybody here a software developer before you started working in ML? Yeah. And anybody familiar with DevSecOps? We build security in. We know how to build security in. We've done this before. We know about secure by design. This is actually a tenet that's been used in software for years and years. You start with security at the very beginning of the life cycle. You don't tack it on at the end. There's an old saying in security that, it's all about bolt-on. And bolt-on security doesn't work. What you want is you want to have it embedded into the system. Right? You think about a car, for example, airbags, right? They're built into the system. There's a discussion, there's thought about, well, where do the airbags have to be? When do they deploy? How much force has to happen? It's secure by design. It means embedding security throughout the development life cycle. If we look in DevOps, right, originally DevOps, and this is just the sort of the standard DevOps infinity loop, you start here in general in software development. You start with planning, you move into, which would be requirements definition and those kinds of things. If we go to the next slide, you can start to see some of the activities that occur along the life cycle of a standard DevOps. Right? You think about your requirements here. When you're encoding, you start actually writing, seeing if the code is working. You start to build it, for example. You got to test. You do all your acceptance testing. And then you go through the release, deploy, operate, and monitor. Now, this is all well and good, but what's missing from it? Security, yeah. So if we pop to the next slide, we see this is how DevSecOps came to be and what it looks like. So now you've got here, the little pieces that are in orange are showing you the security activities that occur along the entire life cycle. We start out, we've got an expert on threat modeling, literally wrote the book on threat modeling. But you start here, even in the planning stage with software development, you start thinking about the threat modeling, and why is that? It's so that when you get to test, you're starting to understand where could it be weak? What am I going to actually test for? In the code, you add security in. Yes, you're still going to do all your integration, your management of the repos, but you start doing code reviews or static application security testing to find vulnerabilities in the code itself. And you can fix it early on. If you look at, does anybody know who Barry Boehm is? Adam, okay. So Barry Boehm worked at IBM. And he is sort of the author, the conceptor of shift left, because he said that earlier in the process, in a systems development process, that you can find a problem and address it, the easier it's going to be and the cheaper it's going to be to fix it. If you think about building a house, for example, if you think about, right now, if you think about building your dream house, right, if you want to move the kitchen from one side to another in your head, how much is that going to cost you? It's nothing. If you wanted to actually, in your own home or your condo or apartment, move the kitchen from one side to the other, how much is that going to cost you? A lot. And that's the whole shift left. That's what Barry Boehm proved through a lot of research, that it's cheaper to fix things early. It's also cheaper to add security in early. Because if right here, if in the static application testing phase, and with a piece of code, if you find out that there's a vulnerability in your code, how much is it going to cost to fix it? Not as much as if you find it when it's out in production operating, because it could have, you could have a Dan who finds out, but a bad Dan, not a good Dan, but an evil Dan who finds the problem in operation and then extracts value from your organization. Or maybe they just create a denial of service and your system stops working. To take it out of production, that's going to cost you a lot, right? So you want to catch it earlier. This is the power of building security in. The other really wonderful thing about DevSecOps is that it made development, security, and operations have to come to the table and talk to each other. So that if operations identified something that the devs were doing early and could say, oh, that could be a problem, you're going to the wrong port on the firewall, we would never expose that port. Then they can, again, address it early in the process. So that's DevSecOps. It's out there. It's in use. It's not as well adopted and is in use in as many companies as it would be nice to have, but it's certainly something that is being used in the software development world right now to build security in. So what if we brought this to machine learning? Well, we can't do a complete perfect map, but there are a lot of overlap. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that we can take, and if you could just kind of build through a little bit on this, Josh. So thank you. That's great. Oh, OK. No, that's good. Thank you. I know, sorry. So if we went from plan, now what do we have? We have scope. Because this is another really interesting thing if you've done software and you haven't done machine learning. I had to get up to speed because I come from the security world. You know, normally you might scope out, but you wouldn't, when you're building software, you wouldn't say, gee, is it even possible for us to create this software to do that? Most of the time you say, I want this software, when I push a button, I want it to light up this system over there, and then that's going to call out to a driver, and they're going to go get me food, and I'm going to create DoorDash. You kind of have an idea of what you can build with software. You might do requirements definition, start to understand how it's going to be used, but you don't even think, can we do this task? Do we have the data? Is it even available, what we want to do? If we want to do an analytics project, can we even do that? So you start slightly differently when you're in machine learning. Engineering the data, I mean, this is like, I spent so much of my career just saying, is that production data that you're using in testing, that you're using to, then get it out of there, get the production data out. No, 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 no. That's sort of like, you want synthetic, you want dummy data. But in machine learning, it's all about the data. finding the right data, exploratory data analysis. Can we use this to do what we want it to do? How do we clean the data? Make sure it's not biased. Do we label it if we're going to use supervised machine learning? All of these things. So there's a whole lot of work that goes on in data that is very, very different. Remember in DevSecOps, this is just people are coding. You're doing this thing very different. You're looking at the data. You're preparing the data. It's a massively, it's an important and a very different way to approach what we're doing. Well, if you're a dev. Model. This is model engineering, model development, model training. Now, either whether you made the model, you probably didn't. It's probably a foundation model that you downloaded from something like a Hugging Face. But as you got this model, you have to train it. You have to make sure that it's going to operate. It's going to perform the way that you expect it to perform. So we've got a very different set of phases that go on in the machine learning lifecycle. But as we roll up around to test, you'll notice that these are actually the same. The activities that you do at each one is different, but these are the same in terms of that you're now going to test, release, deploy, and operate. But here, instead of just doing the test of does it function, we know that when you push this button in that widget or that app, it's supposed to do X or Y. In this, you have to test what's coming out of the model. And you might want to, in the model, what kind of prompts are going to the model? Is it giving the information that's expected? Has it started to drift? Was it trained properly? Did you give it too much data or not enough data in the training so that as you give it new data, is it able to perform as expected? So you're going to test different things. You're going to, as you release things, you're going to look at how you're going to deploy out your model. And then in operate, you'll provision it. And then as you monitor, you're going to be monitoring for some slightly different things. This is a really interesting one in machine learning for any just security folks. There's something called model drift. So with software, you write your software and you deploy it out. Does it start doing anything different after it's been out there for a few? Unless somebody found an O-Day and they're exploiting your software, it's probably going to continue to do what it was built to do throughout its lifetime. Models don't necessarily do that. They drift. So you may have a model that's working great when you deploy it, but you may find that over time it's not giving you as accurate or as on-the-nose information or output. So as you monitor, you're monitoring again for different things. But we still need security. So what does it look like as we add security into our life cycle? Now you start to see the DevSecOps concept, but it's realized within an MLSecOps framework. So if you are in machine learning, these are the kinds of security activities that need to get woven throughout the entire life cycle in order to make sure that we can make it secure by design, build security in. We're still going to be threat modeling like we did in DevSecOps, but now as we get down here where we're engineering data, this is some interesting stuff. Privacy requirements, secure data delivery. These are some of the security activities that really matter at this phase in machine learning as we get into the modeling, right? The thing I was showing you about the Jupyter notebooks. Securing notebooks. You're not doing that in DevSecOps, but you have to do that in MLSecOps. Software composition analysis and DAST of the code and the entire lifecycle and the system that you're running with your models. And then as you're testing, looking at things like model scanning. How do you know the foundation models that you've downloaded are safe to use or execute? We have the developer of our open source tool, ModelScan, that anybody could download. Sam, our lead developer on that. So that as you're downloading these public models that are great to use, how do you know that they're safe to use too? So weaving security all the way through. In release, looking at machine learning, bill of materials generation, I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that one as we go forward so you can get a sense for how you can see, know, and manage what's going on in your machine learning lifecycle. And specifically, in this one, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the machine learning bill of materials. How many folks are familiar with SBOMs? Yep. Say software bill of materials. It was an executive order that came out from the White House a few years ago talking about we need to be able to understand what composes our software, what are the elements, what are the artifacts that go into it? How many open source libraries are in there? Are those libraries up to date? What's vulnerable? Right? It's how we do vulnerability management now. We understand the pieces that make up our overall applications. So what about machine learning? Right? Machine learning, it's a software asset. We know that. We need to secure it. We need to build security in. That means we also need to be able to have visibility into what makes up our machine learning models, our machine learning solutions that we're deploying. So it's a similar concept as the software bill of materials, but you need to look at different things. There's different information you need for machine learning. What it's going to give you is data and transparency about the information related to the model itself. So it gets you risk management of the machine learning lifecycle and the machine learning deployments that will help security people better manage that and be able to understand what the real risks are related to the machine learning or AI that they're releasing. Forensics and audit. This is a really big one, because machine learning has been kind of operating a little bit in the shadows out of the regular security programs. For the people that work in machine learning here, how many of you hang out with the security team at least a couple times a week?
We have white security teams.
Yeah, so forensics and audit, so that they can help to understand what's happened, what's happened within the system, that they can have an audit trail. They can go back and look at who trained the system, what data was it trained on, what was it trained to do, so that you can get a better sense of who created that model and put it together, and then also to improve the outcomes overall. Right? Log4j, if you haven't heard of it in security, it was a library related to logging. It was open source. It was in a ton of stuff. So when Log4j came out as a big vulnerability a few years ago, it was right around Christmas and it was on the weekend, and a lot of security teams just went through a quick inventory and they're like, do I have any application that is Log4j? No, it's good. Let's go home. Let's go to the party, right? You know, because it was around the holidays. Well, it turned out that it was a logging component inside a whole lot of software at a whole lot of companies. So people were literally coming back from parties. I know a couple people that came back. Maybe they'd been a little festive at the party, but had to go back in and go do their job, because it turns out that Log4j was in so many different pieces of software. How did they know that? Because they had an inventory that helped them. A lot of companies had a BOM that helped them understand where the Log4j component was in their software deployments. Same kind of thing with machine learning. If you don't know the pieces, the components, the libraries, the dependencies related to your machine learning solution or your AI solution, we could have another moment like Log4j, but it would be a lot messier because organizations don't have a way really to track these dependencies very well in machine learning. So we need to do that. On the next slide, we've got some more information about what would be inside the bill of materials, some metadata. What's the name of the model? What's it do, right? I mean, seems kind of straightforward and simple, but if you're not tracking that, you're not going to have that visibility. Where did it come from? If it's a foundation model, did it come from, you know, something like the Model Garden or Hugging Face? Metrics. How well is this model doing? Is there latency related to it? And then important aspects that you're probably used to in software, like the libraries and packages, the dependencies, the framework you're using, the applications that are using that model. So what's the model using for apps, and what applications are working with it, and then any connections to the data systems and downstream, right? What Dan was explaining was talking about not just a vulnerability in the model, but a vulnerability in the life cycle related to the running of the model. And that's really very critical, important point. And that's the kind of thing as you get inside the machine learning BOM that you can start to track, so you can see, know, and manage what's going on in your life cycle. And then on the next slide, we just have how you can get the most from it. We strongly recommend that if you are doing software BOMs, software bill of materials, start bringing this information into that process. A lot of orgs now are expanding out their bill of materials to hardware bill of materials too. What of the laptops that you're deploying, what's the hardware in there? Do you trust it? If it came from a big company, maybe you just say, yeah, that's from Apple, it's okay. But if you're building any hardware, you may be tracking the hardware bill of materials, the provenance of the components in that hardware. Standardize. One of the things that happens with software bill of materials is that if a customer says, I'm thinking of adopting this application, you can say, okay, here's everything that's in it. Here's my ingredient list. You don't have to go out and guess. If you're allergic to soy, I'm going to give you the ingredients list so you understand that. That's standardized for sharing. Doing that with machine learning bill of materials too, so that they know where's that data, who trained it, what's that model doing. And then if you want to do exchanges to the bill of materials, they have two standards. There's Cyclone Data Exchange and Software Package SBDX and Cyclone DX. These are standardized protocols so that you can share that information very easily. So bringing machine learning bombs, it's really time for MLSecOps. It's also time to bring machine learning bombs into the rest of the bomb work that's going on. So with that, I'm going to just lead to the wrap up, which is how do we put it all together? It's going to be people, process. It's us. It's this. It's a community coming together and talking about these problems and sharing. You're here with a lot of smart people who do this work every day, and we're all putting pieces of the puzzle together. So getting the people together so that you can talk about it, getting the dev, the sec, and the machine learning and the operations teams all in communication, building a process. We showed you one process that you could use for MLSecOps. The NIST has a AI risk management framework that talks about map, measure, and manage. That's very similar to see, know, and manage, which I had shown earlier. But you don't have to follow anybody's exact process. You do need to get a process in for security so that you can create MLSecOps overall. And then use and leverage tools to be able to help you track and manage and monitor the provenance of your models, how they're being used, and other security-related information. So with that, I hope that you'll continue to be part of the MLSecOps community and continue this discussion. This isn't going to be built in a day. This is going to be the community coming together and all of us having a voice and a say in how we're going to make security better for machine learning operations. So thank you very much for being part of this inaugural meetup, and we hope that you'll continue the conversation with us. Thank you.
Questions for Diana or for Dan? We've got about 10 minutes before we take a quick break.
That's great.
Maddie, do we have anyone in the live chat who wanted to ask a question? Yes, we do. Oh, I'm going to have you speak into the mic here so that they can all hear it as well.
Okay, so we have a question from Rajesh. Would model drift be similar to production bugs?
Oh, that's an interesting. I would say no. I mean, so in general, when you have a bug in production, it's that your software isn't operating the way that you expected it to. Right? I mean, they didn't even say vulnerability. They said bug. It's not.
Sorry.
Okay. Whereas with model drift, I mean, it's true that it's not operating as expected, but I think it's a little different because you've got something where you could go back, you could fix the code in a bug, and in the model with the model drift, you'd have to potentially retrain or start with new data. So similar in that it's not operating as expected, but little different in how we'd address it. I don't know if you guys, Sean or Chris, I know you always have like.
So, and you can echo it to the mic if you need, but for model drift, you're looking at an example where when you trained it, maybe the representative.
You got it.
Hi, I'm Chris, also from Protect AI. But with model drift, you're primarily looking at something where the data that you trained on is no longer representative of the operating environment. So it could be, in cases where your selection, of images doesn't match reality. Currently, lighting conditions could change. In forecasting, like for supply chains, winter can be wildly different than summer. And so if you don't have recent data, that can totally throw something off. And so sometimes it's the data that you trained on is, no longer relevant. Other times it's the context that you're giving the model isn't really reflective anymore. And so trying to figure out, is it a configuration problem or a whole training that it's not exactly a bug, but yeah, it's something that happens over time and it just tends to degrade more and more and more.
Yes.
We have two more questions. One from Ken. Is there a job formalized to coordinate, manage those interdisciplinary convos between teams, security, data engineers, et cetera?
I'm starting to see more and more. I'm starting to see AppSec. I mean, at this point, I don't think it's a really common. I'm sure that there are some people that have this job, but I have started to see in the listings in LinkedIn that there's a lot more push towards, AppSec types in AI, people who are governing models and deployments, and people that are building the bridge. So it's an emerging area, and if someone's interested in doing that job, I think that they're going to have a lot of job opportunities in the next few years.
Awesome. We have one from Sylvain. Do you see MLSecOps tools integrated in pipelines in the future?
We sure hope so.
Okay, and I believe we have one more. How can someone outside research institutions and without years of career experience contribute to hardening AI security, particularly LLMs?
I would say get started. Get started, join a community like MLSecOps. There's a bug bounty program. You can go to hunter.com, HUNTR.com, and look at the kinds of bugs that people are paying out for. So I would say get involved, start looking at things like there are the LLM hardening, sort of capture the flag type contests that are coming up. There were some at Black Hat over this last summer. I'm sure there'll be again. So I would say just get started, just dive in.
Wonderful. I think those are all the questions we have from the live stream.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, last call. Any questions from our live audience? No?
Okay.
How do you test for ML drift or any kind of vulnerabilities?
Well, for drift, you would just look at the outputs, right? You want to start looking at the output, and does the output, is it still accurate against what you're expecting from the output? Or is it still useful in the case of when you're doing a lot of predictions, right? Are you trying to predict what the weather's going to be next week? How close is it to being accurate? If you're trying to predict who's going to win UFC fights, how close is that model getting? So Chris actually has been training a model to predict outcomes, and how do you know if it's drifting or not? How do you check your accuracy?
You're looking at trends over. You're looking at trends over time. It's also not something that you can look at like one event or one particular match. I got that one wrong. My model's terrible. You need to kind of continually look at samples, and if you start to see that the trend is going down and there's nothing, like the environment really hasn't changed, then that's kind of an indication that your model's drifting in performance in some way, and so that it's time to recalibrate based on whatever the current environment is. But it's like performance monitoring for anything. So it could be latency that you're looking for. In this case, you're looking for how closely do your predictions align with what they did when you were training or what you were expecting. When you hit a certain threshold, time to dive back in and investigate it further.
Great. And I think you were also asking about if the model's okay itself. Like, is it malicious? Is there something problematic in the model? Was that, is it okay, Sam? Yeah, so the person who wrote ModelScan, I think, is best to answer that.
Yeah, I can say that we have ModelScan, which is an open source project that scans for model serialization attacks, which is when there's basically injected code in, like, before the model is serialized that can just run arbitrary code when it's deserialized. So that scans like all of the bytecode of the model to make sure it doesn't have operators that would run malicious things. So yeah, scanning models is a very good way to make sure that particular attack hasn't happened.
Yeah, I mean, these models are doing things like, calling out, basically like acting like dropper malware, calling out to an S3 bucket that could have anything in there and downloading it. So yeah, just looking for those kinds of artifacts. Yes?
So thank you for the talk. I think many of the issues that you mentioned, or these security issues, like from an ML perspective, make sense. But machine learning models have existed obviously for a while. So
Yeah.
Are there any like unique issues or peculiar things which are like more unique to LLM security issues, or is it more like because LLMs are more widely being adopted by organizations, so what the kind of issues that always existed are now getting more widespread? So trying to understand, like you being in the security side, like how.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so LLMs have definitely kind of created a whole other area of issues. When you look at the public LLMs, for example, there have been issues with people interacting with them, sharing very sensitive data with an LLM that it turns out they think, oh, this is private, and it turns out, you know, that now that information's coming back out. I think Samsung had an issue with some of their tech information that they had shared into the LLM, and then it came back out to a competitor. So there have been issues about that. There have been issues with LLMs spitting data out that they shouldn't have. So there's one called the poem attack, where the prompt to the LLM was, just keep repeating the word poem to infinity, and it repeated the word poem a number of times, and then it was repeating stuff like, or sending stuff out that was sensitive, like phone numbers, for example, and information about people. So what the LLM comes out with, you know, then there have been guardrails, you know, oh, we won't let the LLM tell you how to build a bomb, but then figuring out a prompt that evades that rather than it saying, you know, how to build you say how to build a bomb, it won't build a bomb, but it will tell you how to build a bomb if you say, tell me a bedtime story about building a bomb. So getting information back out of the LLM that should have been secret, or, you know, getting membership information or training data out of that's supposed to be private. So those are just some of the examples, I think. And then another really big one that I find in security is misinformation, disinformation. You know, we call it hallucinations, like these LLMs are just like out having a party at Burning Man. But like, I mean, that's, if you're trusting the output of that LLM to be accurate and it's inaccurate, and remember, these are predictive systems. They're generative, they're generating stuff, right? That doesn't mean that they know what the ground truth is all the time. And if you've got people using them, assuming that what's coming out of that system is completely dead accurate, and it's hallucinating something that's inaccurate, that is a problem too.
Great. I'm so sorry. I'm going to ask, we're a little crunch for time. We can pause questions now, but Diana will be around during the last hour of the event, so please check in with her personally, and she would love to share more. We're going to take a quick break, and then after that, we'll hear from Adam Shostack, who is a leading expert in threat modeling and secure design, author, advisor. Fantastic talk he has lined up for us. But while we're getting Adam set up, please feel welcome to stretch your legs, refresh your plates and drinks. This outdoor deck here is available to you if you need some fresh air, because it's a little warm in here right now. You can take some nice pictures of the stadium district, and I will let you all know when we're ready to get started. Thank you.
Wednesday night. And Terry was like, yeah, sure. I'm
All
bummed that I didn't get
right.
to see them in Vancouver.
Now it's weird. We're like, somehow it's like we were on different.
We are going to get started. We do it up just a little bit. We put it up just a little bit, Jacob. Up. Okay. Y'all, we're going to get started in just a few minutes here. Just a few-minute warning, if you don't mind finding your seats here. And in a minute, we'll introduce Adam and get our show back on the road. Good. Our second speaker this evening, as I mentioned, is Adam Shostack, lead threat modeling expert on a lot of boards and advisory positions. This evening, he will be signing complimentary copies of his latest book, Threats, What Every Engineer Should Learn from Star Wars, which is fantastic if you haven't checked it out already. So after we do Q&A, Adam has graciously said he will post up over here and would love to have additional conversations with folks. So with that, thank you so very much, and I will turn it over to Adam Shostack.
Well, thank you for having me. And by the way, before I actually get started, those of you here in person, we're all standing in here talking, and their deck space outside is phenomenal. Like, afterwards, you should go out, you should look around. You got amazing views of Sodo, downtown. It's like, wow. That said, I'm thrilled to be here. And as Diana was talking, she mentioned threat modeling a couple of times. And I'm going to talk about using LLMs to help us threat model. But before I do, give me a level set. How many people here have never heard of threat modeling before tonight? Some, thank you, cool, okay. How many people have heard of it but not done it? Some again. How many people have done it? Okay, that's super helpful. I will scale what I'm gonna say with that in mind a little bit. So Charlie introduced me. I'm not gonna introduce myself anymore, but really what I wanna share with you, I wanna start out by talking about what threat modeling is, a little bit about what it isn't, and then how do we use these amazing new tools to help us do this weird technical task that many of us are not familiar with or have never tried, because I think that's one of the magical things about LLMs. So let me just start out by talking about what threat modeling is, and definitionally, threat modeling is very simply using models to help us think about security. So we create models of the security. We create models of the security. Good. We create models of the thing we're working on. We have some models of security. My new book is all about those threats that we are using as we threat model. And it helps us think about the security of a system, as Diana said, before we actually build anything. I loved the move a kitchen example. I often talk about it's expensive to re-pour concrete. Could we drop the audio in the room like just a little bit? I'm getting a lot of feeling I'm talking too loudly as I talk. Thank you. But threat modeling is using these models to help us think about security. Thank you. Is that better for you folks too? Good, good. It didn't feel conversational. It didn't feel like I'm in this room with you. With those of you who are in the room, we've got folks online as well. But I think about threat modeling as the measure twice, cut once of security. So if we're going to be doing construction, to stay with the construction metaphors, we have a piece of wood, we cut it too short, the wood is now wasted. We do a bunch of software development. We didn't think about an authorization model or an authentication model. That software is now wasted. We rebuild it. and it's painful for the people who thought they were ready to launch. It's expensive for the organizations that we work for. And we can avoid it by using these techniques, which can sound a little scary, but are actually feasible for us to learn. And the other thing I want to mention when I talk about threat modeling, I often end up talking about it from a software development perspective, because when we talk about shifting left, getting in earlier, building more secure components is really valuable. But we can also threat model as we deploy, as we operate our systems. We can think about the same sort of questions, we answer them a little differently, but threat modeling applies to both. And so when we threat model, we are fundamentally answering 4 very simple questions. What are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? And there's a lot of details. There's a lot of details that we can get into, and this is my life, is getting into those details. But it's really important to realize that if you're simply asking these 4 questions, you're threat modeling. And one of the really important things is to recognize that we don't need all of the structure. The structures help us do this work, but it's not about the structures. It's about how do I actually think about the question of what can go wrong, right? So, for example, we were talking about model drift. I would not necessarily think about model drift most of the time when I'm securing a system. Does that make it invalid as something we should think about? I'm getting a little bit of head shaking. Good, good. No, it's something that can go wrong. And when we recognize that the question is what can go wrong, we create a situation in which everyone is empowered to participate and help and have a valid opinion. And I think that's incredibly important, because really frequently what happens in our world is we're like, oh, Diana over there is the expert. I'm going to defer to her and let her do this because I don't know what I'm expected to say. But if we ask what can go wrong, you have an opinion, and I want your opinions in the conversation, because it gets us to better answers, better systems that we can deploy. And so I really want to emphasize that. And I want to talk briefly about some myths of threat modeling. So there's this acronym that we use a lot in threat modeling, and especially if some of you are at Microsoft or have been at Microsoft or work with people who have, you may have encountered STRIDE. Spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. I say it a lot. You may have encountered STRIDE, heard it described as methodology. It's not really a methodology. It's a mnemonic. It's a helpful mnemonic, but it's not a methodology. Another thing you will hear people say is DFDs, data flow diagrams, are threat modeling diagrams, and you have to have a data flow diagram to threat model. Wrong. Or you can only use a data flow diagram to threat model. Wrong. They're useful because threats follow data, so it's a useful way to structure your thinking, but I threat model on a whiteboard, I threat model on the back of a napkin. The goal is to answer the question, what are we working on, to draw a picture that helps us scope and understand and come to a mutual understanding. And DFDs are one way to do that. I'm going to skip over the dread stuff for now and talk about LLMs. But before I do, when I talk about LLM security, when I talk about AI security, it's big. There's lots of stuff. There's deep fakes, there's model theft, there's so many different elements to it. And I like to break it down into 4 separate scenarios. One is AI for offense. You know, write me a phishing email or a piece of malware, or imitate this person's voice to engage in an attack by saying, hey, I can't log in, can you tell me the network password? And it sounds like someone you know, it's awesome. There's AI for defense. There's AI for business. Yeah, I like the example of chatbots on your website. It's understandable. And then there's AI for software development, which is really where I want to focus today. And it's a little bit of an overlap between the defense view and the business view. So let me ask another question. How many of you have used a chatbot to help you write code? Almost everybody, but not everybody. So those of you who have done this know that it's like magic, right? And it's magic in good ways, you get stuff, and it's magic in bad ways, the stuff you get surprises you. And I always think of like the scene in Fantasia where Mickey Mouse is getting buckets of water and then there are too many buckets. And that's what I mean when it's magic. It's both awesome and it's scary. And there's a whole bunch of reasons that it's scary, right? The AI is going to take our data. It's going to take our customer data, their personal information. It's going to take our intellectual property. It's going to take our trade secrets. And actually, that one I really worry about a lot, is exposing your company's trade secrets to an LLM might be the worst thing you can do with an LLM because it breaks your trade secret protection, maybe. I'm not a lawyer. It's also, so it's scary because of what goes to the LLM, right? I said data flows are useful because they help us think about where the threats are. So there are threats with the data that goes to the LLM, and there are threats to the data that comes from the LLM. And in secure code, there's been a lot of discussion about the code quality that comes out. So it's insecure and it's vulnerable if it even works. It might not be copyrightable because it's the product of an AI. And so you might be adding uncopyrightable stuff to your code base. But worse, it might be a derivative of copyrighted material. And so you might be adding somebody else's copyrighted code to your code base. And I think of that as a very, very worrisome thing. But this is happening today. I started from the question of who's done this, and almost everyone in the room has used an LLM to write some code. And you do it because it makes you more productive, right? I'm getting some very vigorous nodding, cool. No, my own first real example of this was I had never written code in a Jupyter notebook, but a project I was working on was doing some Jupyter notebook stuff. And after like a 30-minute pair programming session where somebody got me up to speed on what a notebook was and how to use like the run feature, I was like talking to ChatGPT and it was giving me Seaborn code and I was creating graphs and it was like, wow, I didn't know how quickly I could get productive in a different environment. And so all of that means that we're doing this with LLMs today across the organizations that we work for. And that means we need to use LLMs to, or that means we also have the opportunity to use LLMs to help secure our code. So first hypothesis, first idea is that LLMs might actually help us write better code as we get smarter about prompting them. And the smarter about prompting them is a whole nother talk, which I'm not going to give tonight. But everything we do in a secure development lifecycle, everything we do to shift left might be aided by LLMs. And as Charlie, actually I'll say that in a second. So traditionally the things we do include design, code, test, and deploy and respond. I think LLMs have a part to play in each and every one of those stages of securing the products we build and operate. And so I think I've been thinking a lot about how this transforms things. And even today, it's not clear to me if ChatGPT as a vuln scanner is better or worse than traditional static analysis tools at finding vulnerabilities in your code. I think with some of the automation that I'm seeing around using things like LangChain, it's going to be better relatively soon, even if it is or is not today. I'm gonna do that. So as Charlie said, I do a lot of work in threat modeling. I've written 2 books on it. I help companies do it all day long. And I've been spending a lot of energy experimenting to see how can LLMs help us in threat modeling. And I think there are opportunities that include speed, doing more of it faster, speed and scale, doing more of it faster with people who are not necessarily familiar with the tasks. Most of you have not done it. Can an LLM help you do it? And can it help you do it in an accurate way? Because that's a very important sub-question, right? We can produce a lot of garbage very quickly. That doesn't help anybody. But if we can do it accurately, we get a lot of value. There are some limits here. Hallucinations. How do I know if it's hallucinating if I don't know what it's supposed to tell me? There's habituation and other cognitive biases. So habituation is a cognitive bias where you nod along because the thing you're seeing is mostly credible, or the thing that the things that the machine are doing are mostly right. And we've seen a lot of very sad examples of this with Tesla Autopilot, where people are like, yep, this knows how to drive for me, and then all of a sudden it doesn't. And it's hard to maintain vigilance, it's hard to maintain alertness when the machine is mostly right. And I think that applies to using LLMs to help us threat model as well. I also don't think that it's going to do as good a job when we're dealing with really new technologies. And this is just an issue of the training data and how well can transfer between domains work. So one of the hats that I wear is I teach at the University of Washington, and I taught a course last quarter on security engineering. And if you've been listening to the radio or watching TV, you know that the greatest threat of LLMs are that they are going to help children cheat on homework. It's all over the news. It's constant. I talk to people, and like random people at cocktail parties will ask me, what are you doing about students using LLMs? So I fed all of my assignments to several different LLMs to see how they do. I'm very pleased to report that at least today, University of Washington students do better at my questions and my assignments than ChatGPT. But it led me to the question of how durable a result is that, right? Is that going to be the case next week, next month? And it led me to the question of, if I wanted to cheat on my own assignments, how good a result can I get? And my answer is, if you ask ChatGPT or even some of the security-specific GPTs that have been created to give you a threat model, the output is incredibly unpredictable and random. But if you ask it the 4 questions, it starts to get okay. And if you ask it the 4 questions carefully, using techniques like brainstorming, where you say, talk about your thought process, come up with a bunch of different answers, evaluate them, give me the best one, it starts to get okay, like decent quality work coming out. And so if you're asking things like, what are we working on, to get a system model out, saying, here's what I'm thinking of building, give me an architecture diagram for something that looks like this, you can do that. If you say, here's a bunch of code that I was just handed responsibility for, what does it do? It can tell you that. If you say, give me a system model based on this code, and for this one in particular, I've been using Claude a lot from Anthropic. because its larger context window turns out to be really, really helpful for, you can upload multiple files, it can deal with more code at a time. We can ask questions like what can go wrong. We can do that for every story because it's now really inexpensive. We can ask, what are we going to do? And by the way, can somebody give me a time check? I forgot to click my little timer. When should I be wrapping? 5, 6 minutes? Okay, thank you. So we can ask, what are we going to do about it? I'm worried about the threat of model drift. What should I do to build tests for model drift? I personally don't know the answer. I would start by asking an LLM for some advice and then evaluating that advice. No, seriously. It might be wrong, but it's at least as good as Google. So why not? And especially when I'm dealing with something I don't know, I might come and ask community and say, hey, I just got this answer out. What do you all think of it? And that I think of as an editing sort of function rather than a creation function. And editing is way easier on our brains. Evaluating is easier than creating. If we've got a blank sheet of paper, checking, ask the question a couple of times. It's cheap, why not? Ask a couple of LLMs, why not? So suggesting mitigations, writing mitigation code for us to say, how would I solve that problem? Writing test code for us. This is actually something LLMs are pretty good at. And so when I think about all of this, I want to bring in one more model, and this is a model I created to help us think about threat modeling. I call it the Jenga model of threat modeling. So we build a tower, and we've got secure product up at the top of this, and that secure product is supported by a bunch of Jenga blocks. There's technical blocks, like how do I use Stride? There's organizational blocks, like how do we here do this work? What is good enough in order to ship? What's our definition of done here at this company? And there's interpersonal blocks, and each of these blocks has a cost. And so we want to use as few of them as we can get away with because the blocks create a heavyweight process and would prefer lighter weight processes, but sufficient that we're actually doing something that's stable and reliable enough for what we need. And so we can apply this, we can build sort of a matrix with the Jenga model down the side, and the 4 questions of threat modeling. Model, what are we working on? Threats, what can go wrong? Mitigations, what are we going to do? And validation. And so we can think about the sorts of questions that an LLM can help us with as part of building more secure products. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each and every one of these bullet points. I'll put these in Slack tomorrow so that everyone can see them. But I will mention the organizational one. How many of you have dealt with security questionnaires about the features that you're working on before you can actually ship a feature? Many of you. Who enjoys them? Yeah, exactly. They're toil. They're difficult, annoying things that we have to do. And the folks at Databricks gave a talk, and actually this dropped on YouTube today. And what they did was they built an LLM to look at Jira tickets, to look at Confluence pages, and they replaced those questionnaires with an automated system that found features that should have gone through their security review process but didn't. So it's faster, it's more accurate, it's really nice work, and they explain in depth what they did in the talk. They're like, we used this tool and it totally didn't work, and so we replaced it with this and it worked really nicely, and here were our precision and recall rates. So great talk. overall, what I want to think about when I think about the future of threat modeling is if we have a graph, and this is mathy, this is not real math, but this is the way I'm thinking about the world, is human effort is the vertical axis, right? How much work are we putting into threat modeling in order to secure our products? And how much are we investing in LLM quality in our machine learning techniques along the bottom in order to get the output? And these days, threat modeling is a very manual thing. We don't have good machine support for it. And so our human effort per task is really high, which is why most of you have not done it. You need some training, you're a little scared about doing it. There's all these reasonable reasons you have not started. And I think we're gonna see development of very specific tooling that helps us do this. I'm excited about that future. So very quickly, some prompt ideas, some of the things that I've been using that you are able to go use tomorrow. The particular prompts of like, draw me a mermaid diagram of this code works particularly well. Describe the threats to this system using Stride seems to work okay. Being more and more specific about what good output looks like, I couldn't fit onto the slide in a useful way. And when we get to what are we going to do about it, getting really specific about the technologies you're deploying in, like, how do I manage a tampering threat like X? You get sort of vague, useless answers. You add like Terraform and AWS to it, it starts to get very specific very quickly. It's like, here, you want some code? Have some code. And so that was an interesting thing to observe, was the specificity there. Anyhow, with that, just to summarize, I want to say that threat modeling, again, is the measure twice, cut once of cybersecurity. LLMs are absolutely going to make it easier, and we're going to have challenges of how do we evaluate them, how do we trust them, how do we get sufficient accuracy that we can really make this part of our engineering practice. And those things lead me to think this is a really, really fascinating time to be in the field. And so I'm just going to say thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. And yeah.
Okay, so if it's all right, we'll start with Adam. We had a couple questions come up in the MLSecOps Slack community yesterday that we were going to start with, and then a couple virtual questions. And we'll open it up to these lovely folks.
All right, so we have two questions from Sneha. First one being, what is your take on, can LLMs threat model better than humans?
Better? What do you mean by better would be my question, right? I think you can get speed. I think you can get scale. I don't know if you can get accuracy. And I think that better wraps up all three of those. And I think that the next couple of years, we're going to see an evolution of, do I need to do this thing myself? Or do I need to have the machine do it and know how to test it? And I think of this, I'm going to use a very old school example here, but I think of this like the rise of compilers. People said, oh no, I can totally write better assembly code than a compiler can. And I know what the computer is doing, and people were very proud of that skill. And it turns out that nobody does that anymore because the value we get out of thinking at a higher level is so large. So I think we'll find something similar with LLMs where we learn to use them to help us do the work.
Great. And the next question is, did you receive any insights on your question, who's done the most insightful analysis of why Microsoft has a secure future initiative?
I don't have good information about why Microsoft did that. I have a lot of opinions that I'm not going to say on the record.
We also have another question from Ken, which he asked Diana earlier, so we'll ask again for you. How can someone outside research institutions and without years of career experience contribute to hardening AI security, particularly with LLMs? And what work would be most beneficial?
So I'm gonna echo everything Diana said and just sort of +1 on all of that and give a different answer. And that is, I think the hardest thing about LLMs is they have no separation between code and data, right? It's all input that goes into the system and then it gets a response. And I think figuring out a way to really tell an LLM that the system prompt or the context or the information that it's given before it gets to the user input would be an amazingly transformative result in terms of how we protect these chatbot systems. And figuring out how to do that is nobody knows. I'm a big believer that people coming in with different backgrounds will sometimes solve problems in better ways than people who are deeply steeped in something. So I would be interested in their perspective on that.
Great. I think those are all the questions we have from the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. I think since you'll be joining us here for a book signing and sticking around to talk to folks, if you have additional questions for Adam, I'd invite you to do so over here at the table once you're all set up and ready to go. And before I give a little bit more information about the remaining activities for the evening, if you'll join me one more time in a round of applause for both of our guests. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we have about an hour or so left. Once again, welcome to get some air out on the deck. And we do have a couple activities for the rest of the night during social hour that I just wanted to call out. Again, Adam's book's over here, complimentary, a copy for everybody. Please go over, ask questions, have a conversation, and get your book. Also, in just a few minutes, it might take us just a few minutes to set it up, but we do have a free ModelScan demonstration that's going to be playing on video on this back smart TV with just captions, but also if you do go outside on the deck here and wander to the left, there's another small little room that we have reserved with some seats and a television where ModelScan will have the demo running also with audio. So you can wander out there if it gets a little bit too loud in here. And ModelScan is an open source tool that protects against serialization attacks. We have the video is actually narrated by Sam Washko here and also Dr. Marin Kiani, who unfortunately couldn't be here in person this evening. But if you have questions about what you see, Sam would be happy to chat with you, as well as some other Protect AI employees that are wandering around. And then finally, when folks are ready to depart, you don't need a chaperone like you did to get upstairs. You're welcome to use either elevator lobby to hit floor number 3, and that will take you downstairs to the lobby where you can either exit through the doors or access the elevator to the parking garage. And there is security down there who can direct you wherever you need to go. I think we're all set. Please enjoy the rest of your time and make some connections. There are flyers out inviting you to join the MLSecOps Slack space. If anyone would like to collaborate on an event like this in the future, join the Slack space, ping me there, and we can talk about get something set up. Okay, thank you so much for coming.
Hi, I'm Sam Washko. I'm a software engineer with Protect AI, and today we're demoing ModelScan, our open source tool for scanning models to protect against model serialization attacks. Before we demo, here's my colleague Marin to talk about the importance of scanning models.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm Mehreen Kiani. I work as a machine learning researcher at Protect AI. ModelScan can read a model file and verify for us whether the contents of the model file are safe to be loaded or not. Often the way models are saved so that upon loading they can be used directly for inference implies that loading them can execute malicious code. What that means is that attackers can also use this feature, inject malicious code in a model file, and deliver attack on ML systems via machine learning models by simply scanning the model with a command away. So you say model scan, give the path, and it's going to tell you whether the content of the model falls into security levels of critical, high, medium, or low. Because ModelScan can read a model file, it never executes malicious code if it is present in your model file. This gives users like us a very nice heads up whether a model file is safe to be loaded or not.
Thanks, Marin, for that high-level overview. So to actually use ModelScan, it's pretty simple. You can get the package through a pip install, or you can clone our Git repo and build it yourself to see all the open source code. So a basic call is ModelScan, passing in the path through the flag path, or -p for short, and having the path to your machine learning model. And you can see the output has a critical vulnerability because it found an unsafe operator. So it'll show you any issues that were found based on severity levels, and it'll also surface any issues that ModelScan found during the scan. So it can be scanned on a number of different model formats. This one's a Keras, H5, and we can see that it detected a lambda layer, 2 lambda layers in the Keras file. It can also be run on a directory of different files, so it'll scan each file in that directory. So we can see that it found a couple of different vulnerabilities because it scanned a couple of different files here. So with our recent release, we've made the tool a lot more robust and configurable. So each scanner is modularized to run independently and be able to be configured through a settings file. So to create the settings file, run ModelScan, create settings file, -f flag is to force it in that location, -l is the location to put it. If you don't pass in a location, it puts it in the current directory. So if we run that, we're going to see that a settings.toml is created with all of these default settings, have all of our default scanners, Pickle unsafe ops scan, NumPy unsafe ops scan, PyTorch unsafe ops scan all run for a number of potentially suspicious Python operators. Save model TensorFlow ops scan scans for the TensorFlow operators of read file and write file. The Lambda-related Keras scanners all scan for whether a Lambda layer is present, because Lambda layers could have arbitrary code. And in the settings file, you can enable or disable different scanners. You can change severity levels. And you can also add your own custom scanner if you want. So then once you have a settings file, you can pass it back into the ModelScan using the flag for settings file. So now that we're running it with the settings file, it says that it detected the settings file and is using that. So by default, the report is going to be in this console human readable format, but if you want it to come out as a JSON, we also have a flag for reporting format, or -r for short. So if you put JSON, it'll come out with all the information that was in that human readable format in a JSON. You also have the option of an output file for the JSON, and that will write the JSON to the output format that we specified. You can also specify the reporting format as custom, which will read from the settings.toml for which format it should use. So if we run that, settings.toml right now is set to the console report, so we get that, but you can also write your own custom reporting format and specify that in your settings file. You can also specify a custom reporting format, and that will read from the settings.toml. If we run this right now, the settings file is specifying the console report, so that's what we get. But you can write your own custom reporting format and put it in the settings file, and it'll pick that up. So far, we've talked about using ModelScan through the CLI tool, but you can also use it as a Python SDK. So importing ModelScan, creating a ModelScan object, and then passing in the path will give you a Python dictionary with the results in it. So we can see that it has the same critical vulnerability that the CLI tool found. You can also modify the settings through the Python SDK. So I'm importing the default settings and setting pickle unsafe ops scan to be disabled. So now when I run it, it's not finding anything because I disabled the scanner that was finding the issue. We can also modify things like the severity level. So let's say I don't care about Lambda that much, I just want to put it as a low severity. I can run it on this file and it only found a low severity vulnerability. You can also add a custom scanner through this. So for this one, I wrote my own custom scanner. You have to say that it's enabled, and we put it in our settings file. And when we run it now, we see that it came up with custom results. Hope you found this insight into ModelScan helpful. For more information about ModelScan or to check out our other open source projects designed to enhance the security of your AI/ML workflows, please check out the link on the screen.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining us for the virtual MLSecOps community meetup. Make sure you stay engaged in the conversation by joining us in the MLSecOps Slack group. We hope you enjoyed today's presentations, and we very much hope to see you at future MLSecOps community events later this year.